Today I rise in opposition of H.R. 4, the Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2019. I fully support the Bipartisan Voting Rights Act, which is still in place today. However, the bill we are debating today, H.R. 4, is not a reauthorization of the important, historically bipartisan Voting Rights Act that has helped to prevent discrimination at the ballot box since 1965. It has only been since the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Shelby County v. Holder that Democrats have decided to politicize the Voting Rights Act. This landmark decision left the vast majority of the Voting Rights Act in place today. The only thing that was struck down from the VRA was the formula that was using 40-year-old data to determine which states were placed under the control of the Department of Justice, this process known as preclearance. The Supreme Court deemed this data and formula was no longer accurate nor relevant for our country's current climate. Chief Justice Roberts said the Voting Rights Act of 1965 employed extraordinary measures to address an extraordinary problem. He went on to say that regardless of how to look at the record, no one can fairly say that it shows anything approaching the pervasive, flagrant, widespread, and rampant discrimination that faced this Congress, this institution, in 1965, and that clearly distinguished the covered jurisdictions from the rest of the nation. So what does H.R. 4 do? It doubles down on federalizing elections and would attempt to put every state and jurisdiction in this country under preclearance. The majority has been unable to determine the number of states or jurisdictions that would be covered by this preclearance if H.R. 4 were to become law. Apparently, we have to pass this bill before the American people would know if they would or would not be subjected to it. The majority knows H.R. 4 is bad policy that will cripple thousands of local election officials across the country if it were ever to become law. Let me be clear. H.R. 4 is not a Voting Rights Act reauthorization bill. H.R. 4 is about two things: placing the unnecessary preclearance requirements onto states, and the Democrats giving the Department of Justice control over all election activity. My committee, the Committee on House Administration, has jurisdiction over federal election policy, but it does not have jurisdiction over the Voting Rights Act. That goes to the Judiciary Committee. Despite that lack of jurisdiction, our subcommittee on elections majority held 7 field hearings and 1 listening session across this great country on the Voting Rights Act, encompassing 8 different states and over 13,000 miles of air travel. Even with this gargantuan effort to gather evidence to reinstate this struck-down formula from the VRA that we are discussing today, the Democrats were still unable to produce a single voter who wanted to vote and was unable to cast a ballot. This isn't a bad thing. It's a fantastic thing. It ought to be celebrated. We should be celebrating that Americans who wanted to vote were able to do that. And credit should be given to the Voting Rights Act for helping to achieve that. The 2018 midterm election produced the highest voting turnout in 4 decades. And that's according to data from our Census Bureau, especially among minority voters. The sections of the Voting Rights Act that are currently in effect are continuing to help safeguard the public from discrimination at the ballot box. Every eligible American who wants to vote in this country's elections should be able to cast a ballot. That's why we have the Voting Rights Act, a great example, until today, of a bipartisan solution that is still working today to help Americans and protect from voter discrimination. I've now seen 4 election-related bills from the majority come to this floor, and all of them have the same common theme: catchy titles and federalizing elections, a responsibility the Constitution gives to our states. H.R. 4 is simply more of the same. It's a solution in search of a problem. That is why I cannot support this legislation. I ask my colleagues to join me in making sure states maintain control of their elections. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.